Okay, so the other day I listened to a debate or conversation, or whatever you want to call it, between Destiny and a self-proclaimed leftist named Batya Ungar-Sargon, who is the deputy opinion editor of Newsweek. Substantively, her arguments aren't that different from the post-leftists who make the case for Donald Trump, but her angle came more from a concerned trolling perspective. I don't know if she's arguing in bad faith or is somehow this misinformed, but either way, I wanted to do some cleanup work, as Batya is a perfect example of how people calling themselves leftists abandon things like minimum wage increases and unionization, and instead adopt anti-immigration rhetoric and sprinkle their arguments with phrases like the elites in order to frame Trump as a champion of the people. They play hide the ball when it comes to things like raising the minimum wage and unionization because Trump is horrible on these policies. So on to the debate. The first bit that caught my attention was where Batya credits Trump for the temporary rise in median real wages that occurred in 2019. She falsely claims that this is the first time this has happened in 60 years, and she completely ignores the fact that this was mostly due to the minimum wage rising in several states, something which, of course, has nothing to do with Trump's policies. There is another factor. By this time, the economy had nearly reached full employment, a trend that Trump inherited from President Obama. It's common when the economy reaches full employment that employers have to raise wages to compete for potential employees who are now in shorter supply relative to available positions. This is, in fact, why we're seeing real wages rising right now. Now, here is how she credits Donald Trump.
You were to say I'm better under Trump, but ignore the last half of his presidency, and then say, well, look at what I am under Biden, who is coming in. By the way, the United States, do you acknowledge that the U.S. is outperforming every other G7, every other OECD country right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is this like? Well, we were better under Trump. You weren't better under Trump. You were better before COVID, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Under Trump. I mean, and the reason that they were better under Trump because he reversed certain economic trends that had been afflicting the United States since 1971, which was the high watermark for working class wages. They stagnated after that and then began to precipitously decline when you factor in inflation. And the reason for that is policy that, if you're a working class person, at the end of the month, there's a certain amount of money in your bank account. And it doesn't matter what you're hearing from conservative media, like that doesn't lie, right? Like there's a certain level of, existential crisis that no amount of media or culture wars or influencers or what have you can fake, right? It's a reality that you come up against. And the reality is that things were really getting bad for working class people. And Trump reversed that trend. In 2019, we saw the first wage increases for working class Americans in 60 years. If you look at the data, 2019, the bottom 25% of wage earners saw a 4.5% wage increase, and the top 25% of wage earners only saw a 2% wage increase, which means that Trump was the first president since 1971 to shrink the wealth gap.
Okay, so Batya rightly points out the stagnation and then falling wages of the middle class, but doesn't mention the gutting of unions or the lower taxes on corporations and the wealthy. Also, note how she talks about the wealth gap, but then specifically singles out the bottom 25%, and she's citing wages, not wealth. The reason for this is that the wealth gap has slowly been decreasing overall since it hit its peak in 2012. The bottom 50% has seen a slow but gradual increase, which peaked in 2022 and has slightly tapered off since. This is likely due to Biden's child tax credits, which temporarily cut child poverty by 40 to 50%, which Batya, of course, fails to mention, and which no Republicans voted to continue, expiring at the end of 2021. Now, why does Batya cherry-pick 2019 and the bottom 25%? Simple. That's the year that several states increased their minimum wage, a policy that has nothing to do with Trump. But of course, Batya mentions none of this because she wants to credit Trump for this increase. Let's watch how she does this.
which is something no one wants to talk about because the free market right obviously really doesn't care and really doesn't want to talk about it, but the left doesn't want to give him credit for that. And you ask, okay, how did he do that? Well, through a series of very intentional policies that started to reverse that trend, policies that had been put in place by, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, later Joe Biden, amping up some of them. So, immigration is a really good example because the policy was so clear and so obvious. There were three executive actions that just made the number of illegal immigrants crossing the southern border plummet. And one of the first things Joe Biden did when he came into office was remove those executive orders, which meant that we saw this crisis at the border and, 10 million, 15 million, whatever the number is, illegal immigrants coming into the country. And what that did was immediately halted the wage growth that working class people saw because suddenly you had millions and millions of people competing in a very limited number of industries that had been seeing wage increases because of the limit of illegal labor and because, of course, of the post-pandemic labor crunch. So, things like that, where it's like the policy is very, very clear. And the way that it helped very specific struggling working class Americans is very, very clear. So you could say, look, you vote this guy in, we're not going to have a country because we're not going to have a democracy. And we can definitely debate that. But to somebody who is a janitor, who started to suddenly see like wage increase and then to have that taken away by very obvious, clear executive orders because policy really matters. To me, I wouldn't say to that person, you have to put this other higher order thing ahead of whether you can feed your family. Like, to me, I want to live in a country where working class people who we rely on to survive can achieve the American dream so that, it's not something that just the elites can achieve, which is sort of where we were headed in the years before. And this is all just, aside from the questions of character, aside from the questions of January 6th, like there is, at the end of the day, for me, this, as a person of the left, like this very material reality we're coming up against.
All right. So in addition to ignoring the minimum wage increases across several states, Batya is trying to credit Trump's immigration policy for stemming the tide of immigration and raising lower income wages. If this was indeed the case, we should see a meaningful decrease in border crossing encounters or a meaningful increase in the numbers of removals or returns. But we don't. She also conflates the number of undocumented immigrants with the number of overall immigrants, which is 50 million. This is a bait and switch I've seen from anti-immigration advocates. They'll argue that illegal immigration is flooding the country with cheap labor and depressing wages, and then cite the total number of immigrants to make their case. Furthermore, France and Germany have a similar number of overall immigrants, and Canada has a significantly higher rate. They haven't seen the same rise in income inequality, in part because immigration isn't as problematic as people like this claim, but also because these countries maintain a higher rate of unionization. Lastly, if Batya is so versed on immigration statistics and concerned with its effects, why not mention that border encounters have plummeted this year? It would seem that she's more interested in making the case for Trump and isn't really that concerned with illegal immigration. So now let's listen to Batya engage in whataboutism by comparing the widespread belief on the Republican side that the election was stolen with a stat that she appears to invent out of thin air.
The peaceful transfer of power are one of the most important parts of the United States of America.
I think, like I said,
wait, do you agree that
I agree that it is paramount.
Okay.
And I
yes.
agree also, I believe, as the polling found, that 66% of Democrats believe that Putin had stolen the last election and interfered in the tallies, okay? So clearly that cannot be the standard by which we judge who gets to be an American, who gets to be part of our community.
Number one, that's whatever you're citing is not true. That's not that the election was fake or fraudulent. That might have been true in one poll.
Literally intervened in the voting machines and the tallies.
Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but where did this come from? Or where did this number or idea come from?
This number of 66%, it was widely circulated right after the election.
I've seen in 2018 that this is a YouGov poll, 59% of Democrats are very concerned about improper relations between the Trump campaign and Russia. I see that.
I can send you this figure that's very widely known.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, you can shoot it to me later. But The fact that
Okay, so she claims that it's widely known that 66% of Democrats believe that Vladimir Putin interfered with the actual vote count in the 2016 election. Of course, this triggered my bullshit alarm because I've never heard this stat. And as someone who was unhappy with Trump's win in 2016, I was adamantly looking for evidence of Russia's election meddling. I never came across this stat, and when looking for it in response to this video, I still can't find it. The closest I can find is the poll that really was widely circulated, that 60% of Americans say Russia meddled in 2016 election. Of course, this refers to Russia flooding social media with fabricated conspiracies and other misinformation and signal boosting existing misinformation. This has nothing to do with Putin interfering with the vote count. The only reference I found for 66% was the number of Democrats who approved of the Mueller investigation. Now they'll discuss the bipartisan border bill that originally had Republican backing until Donald Trump convinced the GOP to defeat it. Batya is going to use one of the usual cherry-picked talking points to argue why it wasn't a good bill. But before we play that, let's pause here to see who supported this bill. The Border Patrol Union, who backed Trump, by the way, said that the border bill was absolutely better than what we currently have.
I understand politics, and I can understand why Republicans would go against this for political purposes. I get that. There is that aspect to it. This bill transcends administrations. This will go beyond Biden. It will go beyond Trump. It will go beyond the next president. So I'm looking at this from the standpoint of we need something that is going to continue to go past and not just executive orders. There are plenty of weaknesses in here, but there's also a lot of strengths. And when you look right now what we're currently dealing with, this is a slow month, and we're dealing with 6,700 apprehensions on a daily basis. What this would do is it would cap it to where we couldn't take anything more than 5,000. Now, this does not say that we're going to release 5,000 people into the United States. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It says that we will hold single adults in custody. They will not be subject to release.
I know a lot of Republicans are against it because Donald Trump is against it. But here's the problem for you guys. The Border Patrol Union came out, and the acting CBP chief both came out and said it's not perfect, but this is the best thing we've seen in decades. So are Republicans going to say that the Border Patrol Union and the acting CBP chief are wrong?
Well, look, they can have their perspective, Steve, and we've got a lot of respect.
It's their jobs, Tom.
And it's our job to.
And as a side note, this is one of the ways I can tell which content creators are informed and acting in good faith, as opposed to those who are misinformed and/or are grifters. I see what the stakeholders say about a bill. In this case, it's the Border Patrol. The Republican Party is always praising the Border Patrol, claiming they are underfunded and complaining about immigration. So if we have a bill that was praised by the Border Patrol, then we know that the people making arguments like the one Batya is about to make are either misinformed or are acting in bad faith.
Totally right about that.
And if we want to talk policy for a policy thing, right? And this is why I know that conservatives don't vote on policy and they don't care about illegal immigrants. I don't think it even affects the country that much, or at least people don't think it does. Because if they did think that, why would they all cheer when Donald Trump annihilated the immigration bill in Congress?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Republicans decided to pull the plug on the immigration bill, on the border bill in Congress, because Donald Trump told them to keep the border open for an election issue. Why wouldn't everybody be mad if this was such a huge deal in the United States?
Because that immigration bill set the bar for closing the border at 5,000 illegal immigrants a day.
Right now, the bar is unlimited.
Bill.
It did more than that. The bar right now is...
That's not true, because then Biden took executive action 3 months later, and he set the bar at 2,000. So just by defeating the bill, the bar was then lowered by 3,000 illegal immigrants a day. You can't with a straight face.
I couldn't find any evidence that Biden's executive would close the border if there were 2,000 crossings in a day. What I did find is that it refers specifically to people crossing the border seeking asylum, as opposed to filling out the paperwork in advance and going through the process. If that number exceeds 2,500, then the asylum process shuts down. So once again, It appears that Batya isn't too concerned with facts and is just here to make the case for Trump.
Let me give you an example that I think you'll appreciate. There's a place where we can see a controlled experiment of the way in which illegal immigration impacts the wages of the working class, and it's Las Vegas. The average woman or man who cleans hotel rooms in Las Vegas, which is a very physically demanding job, one that surely the elites believe that no American would want, the average pay is $22 an hour, which, depending on the price of housing, is a middle-class wage. The union there gives them full health care. They don't pay any fees, any co-pays. They can get $20,000 help on a down payment on a home from the union. It's really, really great work. It is sort of the promised land for hospitality workers. How are they able to get paid so much? How are they able to get all these amazing benefits and working conditions? It's because of this, Robbie. The casinos are so tightly regulated, they're not allowed to hire illegal immigrants. And so there is not a single illegal immigrant employed in any of those casinos. And as a result, hospitality jobs pay a living wage. If you are a busboy, you are making a living wage. And I remember I went there, to report this out.
Okay, let's have a little more fun with Batya. In an interview, she claims that Las Vegas is a perfect test case. Why is it a test case? Is it because its hospitality industry is more unionized than in other cities? Or perhaps because it's a tourist attraction that brings in money from elsewhere, and so the jobs can pay more? No, apparently, to Batya, what sets Las Vegas apart is that the casinos are so heavily regulated that they can't hire illegal immigrants. Of course, it's illegal for any employer in the United States to hire illegal immigrants. So how this is a test case for the effects of illegal immigration as opposed to unionization, which really does set Vegas apart from other cities, is beyond me. The answer is obvious. Batya isn't doing real research. She's finding ways to make the case for Donald Trump. Citing Vegas's high unionization rate isn't helpful for her case because Trump is anti-union. She's doing far more public relations than journalism, certainly on this matter. Well, that's it for now. Let me know what you think in the comments.